Hello, welcome back to Blender Sushi LIVENODING. In this episode, I want to show you how we can create something like this using geometry nodes. So as you can see, it looks like something. It's like a spiral, right? Or like a seed, or it could be like anything. It looks slightly complicated, but it's actually really simple. And I created this using geometry node simulations, or we can just use like a repeat zone if you are using Blender 4.0. Currently I'm using 3.6, and 3.6 already come with the simulations zone, so input and output. So what we need to do is actually super simple. I saw the other day someone using Procreate, and he basically draw like an N-Gon like this, and then for every sequential N-Gon he draw, he actually kind of drawing it smaller and smaller. Anyhow, it's more or less it's almost like a spiral. And here I'm doing the same thing. I'm kind of simulating the same thing. So let's take a look what's actually happening if I don't use anything at the last part. So this is what's it looks like from the top view. If I select the whole, okay, this is if I slow it down. Okay, this is we start with an N-Gon, and for every frame, because this is simulation zone, for every frame it's updating, it's gonna create a duplicates and gonna make it smaller and smaller and smaller. And you need actually like a certain angle of rotations and then scale in order to make it. This is like a perfect. It's something that you will see on the flower, like a perfect ratio sort of thing. And you can see it's actually really fast. There's actually one thing I need to tell you before I continue explaining the whole thing. When you do these transformations, just a simple rotations, we know that we need to use the join geometry inside simulation zone. So that's the trick. And we also need to use this transform geometry. Be careful if you put this transform geometry before the join, because if you put this over here or over there, Blender will slow down and it's gonna crash Blender, because the memory, the loop is gonna be kind of loop on top of loop. And if you make a duplicate, it's gonna be like transform, like what is it called, like exponential repetitions inside the loop. Be careful, basically be careful with this transform geometry. Where you put this will actually matters. Okay, so what's happening at the moment, I just rotate and translate and scale at the same time for every N-Gon. Okay, for every frame it's created. Okay, so the N-Gon currently it's this mesh circle is actually 8. I can make this 6, but we won't get the perfect result. But still kind of interesting. You can play around with this like a spiral graph kind of thing, right? So I'm using instance in this case. So point plug into instant on points, and we are instancing this circle. And I am scaling the instance over here. Actually, I don't need to scale it. And there's this realize instances. I will explain why this is off. You can have this on and off and see a different result. So original geometry goes in, and then it goes in a loop, and it's gonna create duplicates. Okay, with the corresponding transform, and each time it's gonna be smaller and smaller and smaller. Whatever coming behind it is like, it's more like a decorations. If I put this in, so you can see it's like a seed or some kind of rice. I don't know. I think it's looking quite interesting, especially if you get really close, and then it's gonna get smaller and smaller until it goes closer to 0, and you can. It looks like a snail. It's a spiral. So what is the decoration for? So the decoration is really just to make it so it's shaped like a seed. So what's happening here, I'm splitting the edges and I'm scaling the elements. If I make this to 1, what's gonna happen is like this. But I'm scaling it to 2, so it's longer. It's kind of like stretching the edge. And then I use mesh to curve and then resample the curve into points, and I trim the curve. I can actually make this shorter, which is could be interesting as well if you want it this way. So it's shaped more or less like a cone. You can have it longer or shorter. Okay, 0 to 1, back to original, and then set the curve radius over here, and then at the end it's really just curve to mesh, and then we have this star. We don't actually need to have the star. You can just use a circle. Okay, if you want it that way, simpler. You can see, you might actually notice, okay, without this circle, it's just like a bunch of edge, and this is what's really happening. So from N-Gon split all the edges, scale the elements. Okay, scale the elements. So it's pretty basic. Just scale it, and then mesh the curve, resample into points based on the length. Trim the curve. You can trim it. You can trim the beginning and the end. Set curve radius. We have this multiplier, etc. We have this. Yeah, this is for the seed. So the seed of rice or whatever seed you want to create. Could be like a little bit like a toothpick, you know, and it gets smaller and smaller. And I'm using the spline parameter length to control the thickness of the radius of the curve. Okay, it's tricky but simple as well, and you can actually set position here and then do the offset using noise if you want it that way. I might have shown you this at some point. Vector math minus 0.5, normalize the noise. Yeah, and yeah, I think you can also set the position before the set curve radius, but anyhow, not gonna deal with that for now. Keep it simple. Instancing. If I turn this off, what's gonna happen is everything is gonna keep the same thickness, and we keep the instancing. I don't know why it stops there, but it's kind of interesting that we get different result by doing that. This one's actually continue until it gets smaller and smaller. So different effects. So you can actually do the same thing using Blender 4.0 and repeat zone. Okay, let me close this first. Save as new version. Oh, by the way, if you're doing this the wrong way, if you put the transform before, this is gonna crash Blender. Okay, you need to be careful when doing this. So I need to also be careful. It's gonna crash Blender and it's gonna crash my system. So once it goes 20, yeah, don't do it this way. Put the transform outside, and the circle should be, yeah, something like that. This is correct. This is the correct way to do it. Just don't do the transform inside before the geometry. It's a warning. Otherwise it's gonna crash Blender. So another example is using the Blender 4.0 alpha. So instead of using simulations, we can use repeat. Repeat zone is gonna be much simpler and probably preferable. 4.0 alpha. Okay, 0 open recent, N-Gon Radial. Okay, similar, but here we can have control over repetitions without running the simulations. We don't need to extend the time frames. We don't need to advance in time. We just use repeat, right? It's very simple. So mesh circle goes inside the geometry, and then do the transform over here. Don't do the transform after the join in this case. Yeah, just something to keep in mind. I think if we do the sequence a little bit wrong, then the result's gonna be, it's gonna slow Blender. This is fast, and you can scrub. If I cut this, what's gonna happen? Okay, still actually working, which is interesting. So anyhow, what I want to show you, even though it's like super simple, there's a lot of concept underneath. Try to rebuild this yourself without watching the video, and you will find something interesting. I mean, it doesn't always goes to what you're trying to do. Sometimes it's gonna crash if you actually put the transform outside. Yeah, outside after the join geometry, it's gonna give different effects. Okay, so it's very simple. N-Gon, rotate, make it smaller and smaller, and also play with the scale and repeat it. Definitely, this is like a kind of super important. I think I can make 100 or 108 tutorials like to explain the principle of the basic principle of geometry nodes, repeat, and simulation zones. This is one sort of thing that you need to understand before you go too far. Okay, we have the spline parameter again, using I think the length, and then we can control the thickness, right? Split edges, same thing. Split edges mesh to curve, resample the curve based on the length, maybe. I think I did something slightly different from the other one. As you can see, the result is quite different. Split edges, maybe trim, curve. Probably need to normalize the curve at some point. Split edges, mesh to curve. I think after I split, I can actually scale the elements. Okay. On the edge, scale on the edge. Rotation scale based on the factor. And the rest is pretty much the same than the other one. Maybe, I don't know why the result is a little bit different. It's not like the grain of rice that we saw earlier. Maybe my rotation is too strong. I can show you if I put the repeat on at the back here. Okay, still fast in this case. But anyway, play around with this play around with the setup, but I think if you put it on the other side, it's gonna crash Blender. I can show you that it's gonna crash the system. But repeat zone, where is it? Simulation zone, radial. It's gonna crash Blender. To be careful, it's gonna crash this recording as well. So look at this. If I run this, so after 20, now my system is crashing. Okay, so I shouldn't do that.